Maybe. Maybe not. Good afternoon. My name is Emily DePue, and I'm the student coordinator for the Dole Institute Student Advisory Board. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. There we go. My name is Emily DePue, and I'm the student coordinator for the Dole Institute Student Advisory Board. Welcome to the Dole Institute's 16th Dole Leadership Prize. This event is held every year to honor a person or group that has inspired others through their leadership. It is fitting that we are here today to honor Secretary James Baker with this award. His public service in this country is immeasurably influential, and Secretary Baker's statesmanship was steeped in good character and consequential fortitude. But simply put, he truly set the gold standard. It is for this reason I believe his story and leadership serves to inspire everyone, but most importantly, students. There is so much that can be learned from Secretary Baker and how he represented the United States, both domestically and abroad. Being perceptive, hardworking, and most importantly, a good listener is crucial to success. And these few characteristics help contribute to defining Secretary Baker's service. Being a good listener means you have the ability to make things work, and working diligently to accomplish what needs to be done is key to being an effective leader. Secretary Baker is the first United States Secretary of State to receive the Dole Leadership Prize. It is only logical to award such an honor to a man who not only set a phenomenal example of leadership, but to give this award to a man who has forever set the standard of superior leadership for students. On behalf of the Student Advisory Board and all of the students at the University of Kansas, I'd like to welcome Secretary Baker to our campus. Before we begin this afternoon, I'd like to remind you to please turn off your cell phones. And now, please welcome Associate Director Dr. Barbara Ballard.
Thank you, Emily. Good afternoon and welcome to the Dole Institute of Politics today's Dole Leadership Prize program with former U.S. Secretary of State James Baker. Today's interview will be conducted by Dole Institute Director Bill Lacey. Before I introduce our guest, however, I'd like to explain how the question and answer portion of today's program will work. Due to time constraints relating to travel, we will have limited time for questions. To expedite the process, we ask that you please write down your brief question using the note card and pencil provided to you upon your arrival today. Toward the end of the interview, we will prompt you to pass your cards to the center aisle where they will be collected. We will answer as many of these audience questions as time allows. Today's guest, as you've heard, is the recipient of the 2018 Dole Leadership Prize. This prize is awarded annually to an individual or group whose public service leadership inspires others. Past recipients include President George H.W. Bush, Congressman John Lewis, Senator Nancy Kassebaum, and the Wounded Warrior Project. Our guest today served in senior government positions under 3 U.S. presidents, culminating in his appointment as our nation's 61st Secretary of State under President George H.W. Bush. During that time, he traveled to 90 foreign countries as the U.S. confronted the unprecedented challenges and opportunities of the post-war era. He also served as White House Chief of Staff and Secretary of the Treasury under President Ronald Reagan, and as White House Chief of Staff and Senior Counselor for President Bush. He continues to be active in politics and U.S. foreign policy today, and is the honorary chairman of the James A. Baker III Institute of Public Policy at Rice University. Ladies and gentlemen, please give Secretary James Baker a very warm, Jayhawk, welcome.
Is my mic? There we go. Okay, good. Mr. Secretary, we appreciate your coming to the University of Kansas campus and very much looking forward to today. Can we start? I usually like to start with a baseline question. So the baseline question is, tell us about your upbringing and your education.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, Bill. Nice to see you again. Everybody knows, I guess, that Bill worked in the Reagan White House when I was Chief of Staff for President Reagan and in the political office. And he was showing me a picture here a minute ago about the 1988 campaign that he traveled with Ronald Reagan on Air Force One on the last day. That's a campaign that we happened to win. 49 states. I'm not sure we'll ever see that again in U.S. politics, but we won 49 states, and we damn near won Mondale's home state of Minnesota. And it was wonderful working for the Gipper, and we were so arrogant. If you remember the last day of the campaign, we even went into Minnesota, but lost that state and lost the District of Columbia. My upbringing was in Houston, Texas. I had a wonderful family. Beautiful parents. They instilled in me a strong work ethic, but they also told me that politics was a dirty business, and that really they wanted me to be a lawyer. I came from a long line of lawyers, but my grandfather had a mantra that he would recite to the young attorneys who came to work at the family law firm in Houston. He'd say, if you want to be a good lawyer, work hard, study, and keep out of politics. So oftentimes, people come to me today and say, why didn't you take your grandfather's advice? And I said, are you kidding? 2 out of 3 ain't bad. I worked hard and I studied. So, but I was really brought up with the idea that politics wasn't for really good attorneys. And a series, a congruence of a series of events came about to set me on a different career path. I practiced law for 18 years in a major Houston, Texas law firm. And then I lost a wife to cancer when she was only 38 years of age, and leaving me with 4 small sons. But I had a friend in Houston who happened to be my tennis doubles partner. And he came to me and he said, Bake, he said, I want you to help me run for the Senate here in Texas. And I said, well, that's great, George, except for 2 things. Number 1, I don't know anything about politics. And number 2, I'm a Democrat. He said, well, we can cure that latter problem. And when I'm talking to a group of Republicans, I say I got religion. And when I'm talking to a mixed group, I say I changed parties. So you can take it any way you want. But I never intended to go into politics and public service in my life, and that's how it happened. George Bush is an extraordinarily thoughtful, kind, and considerate person. And he was looking out after his buddy. He said, you know, you need something, do something, take your mind off your grief. And that's how I happened to get into politics and public service. And then, as you and I were discussing not long just before we came in here, I ended up running 2 campaigns against Ronald Reagan. One for Jerry Ford that Bob Dole was the vice presidential nominee on, and Elizabeth was out there campaigning with us every day. And then one for George H.W. Bush. And after we won the presidency in 1980, you could have knocked me over with a feather because President Lech Reagan told me we were celebrating the victory at the Century Plaza Hotel in Los Angeles. And it's November 1980. And President-elect Reagan then comes to me and said, Jim, before you go back to Texas, I want to talk to you. And when I got home that night and told my wife that, she started crying. Because she could smell what's coming, I guess. But anyway, he asked me to be his White House Chief of Staff. And I'm not sure that will ever happen again in American politics where somebody is broad-gauged enough to go to a person who ran 2 campaigns against them and ask them to be their White House Chief of Staff. But the Reagans had seen what had happened in the Carter presidency when a lot of Georgians came up and didn't know how to deal with Washington. Washington's a special place. Unfortunately, it's not a particularly nice place now. It's sort of ugly. But they wanted someone who knew how Washington worked, who knew how the press worked, how Congress worked, and how the system worked. And that's why they turned to me. And as you and I were discussing, Bill, we ended up, 3 of us really were the president's primary aides, Ed Meese, Mike Deaver, and myself. We were called a troika. And while there were tensions within the group from time to time, the benefit of it was the president got views from every spectrum. And it served him, I think, particularly well, especially if you look at his record of accomplishment over 2 terms. Anyway, that's how I got into politics. Never intended to do it.
Okay, let's talk about one area of President Reagan's accomplishments that were especially big. Talk a little bit about obtaining bipartisan approval for the tax and budget cuts, the economic package.
The economic package in 1981 is the one I think you're talking about. Mm-hmm. And we came into office, and we had learned from the experience of prior administrations. The Carter administration came in, they sent up many, many initiatives to Capitol Hill. We concluded, first of all, we drew up a 100-day plan, and we concluded that we were going to focus with laser-like efficiency on our economic program. And the economic program was reduce marginal tax rates and eliminate as much spending as we could reasonably. And we focused on that, and we didn't let anything get in the way of it. In fact, I remember the first National Security Council meeting of the Reagan administration. We're sitting in there, and the president calls on the Secretary of State to give an overview of what's happening in the world. The Secretary of State at the time was Al Haig, and he was talking about the conflict in Latin America and how Cuba was fueling it, and said, you know, Mr. President, we can take care of that. We could turn that island into a parking lot. We said, what? That's not consistent with focusing on our economic plan. So we took steps to move everything away from those kinds of considerations. And we were quite lucky. We appealed to a group of moderate Democrats called the Boll Weevils, and we got support from them. We got enough to pass through a Democratic-controlled House substantial tax reduction and budget cuts. We didn't get all the budget cuts that we wanted, but we got some. In any event, our program was enacted, and it led to some rather spectacular economic growth, but only after the midterm elections, in which we took a bath, because we were wringing the high interest rates out of the high Carter interest rates out of the economy. But ultimately, our program took off, and we created millions and millions of new jobs. 18 years, in effect, of sustained non-inflationary growth in this country. And that was our economic program. Bob Dole was extremely important in the implementation of that. We did some other things too that have never been done since, and one of them had never been done, well, both of them had never been done before. In 1983, we took on the third rail of American politics, the Social Security system, because it was financially bankrupt. And we decided we were going to try and fix the financial solvency of Social Security. And it wasn't all that difficult to do, but Democrats were like this with respect to that idea. But we went to Tip O'Neill, who was the titular head of the Democratic Party, Speaker of the House at the time, said, Tip, you know, this is something we really ought to do, fix the financial solvency of Social Security. We raised the retirement age a little bit, and we raised a little bit the contributions that people who were coming into the system would make, and we fixed the solvency of the system for 30 years. And it had never been done before. And it was done through that kind of bipartisan cooperation, but also through that laser-like focus on our economic program. And then in 1986, well, Bob was chairman of the Finance Committee when we did the Social Security reform, and he was instrumental and critical to that. And then in 1986, Reagan's number one domestic priority was to see if we could get revenue neutral tax reform, not the kind of tax reform we just enacted where we puff up the deficit and increase the debt. This was revenue neutral in 1986, first time it had been done in 100 years. And again, we did it with Democratic support and Democratic votes. At that time, Bob Dole was the majority leader and helped tremendously in getting that passed. And those are two, I think, very signal accomplishments of Ronald Reagan's administration.
Mm-hmm. You alluded to this, Mr. Secretary, a few minutes ago, but go back and share with us what you thought the key elements were of the 1984 reelection campaign. As you and I were discussing, we're not going to see presidents winning 49 states
No.
very often at this point. What
No.
was that election like, though?
Well, it wasn't a foregone conclusion that it would be that much of a wipeout for the Democrats. But when Mondale went on TV and said, we're both going to raise your taxes, he won't tell you, and I just did, we thought, and that was one thing. But we were running against a known liberal, pretty far over on the left. And so we thought we had a pretty good chance to begin with because Reagan was very popular, and he was a strong president, a strong personality, and boy, was he a communicator. I mean, he could sell ice to the Eskimos. He was really good. And so we thought we had a pretty good chance. We never dreamed we would win 49 states. But we had a good record. A first-term record had been pretty good after we'd finally squeezed all that high interest out of the economy. Our economic program was taking off. We had rebuilt America's defenses, re-strengthened the Defense Department. A lot of good things had happened, so we had a good record to run on.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, one of the challenges to hosting someone like the Secretary is there's so many questions I want to ask, but I can't ask all of them. So let's skip forward to the Bush years and talk about, let's start with the response to the fall of the Iron Curtain.
Well, I don't think we've ever had a president who was any more well-prepared in foreign policy when he became president than George Bush. And I will tell you this, and this is, I know I'm biased because I'm his friend of 40 or 45 years or whatever. I ran all of his political campaigns, and he's my daughter's godfather. But with all of that hanging out, I got to tell you, he's the best one-term president this country ever had. If you look at the record, and he's one of the very best presidents of all time. So a very fine person to work for, but his foreign policy credentials were superb. He'd been our first ambassador to China. He'd been vice president for 8 years and attended every National Security Council meeting that there was. He'd been ambassador to the United Nations. So when we were confronting the collapse of communism and the change of the world as we had known it for the 40 years of the Cold War, we couldn't have had anybody better prepared to be at the helm at that time than George Bush. And he made it clear right off the bat to all of us, we're not going to do any gloating, no triumphalism. And so he got a lot of grief from the press for not being sufficiently animated about the world having changed in our favor after 40 years of the Cold War. But he refused. He knew that we still had a lot of business to do with Gorbachev and Shevardnadze being the foreign minister of the Soviet Union. And he wasn't going to stick it in their eye. He knew they were cooperating with us, working toward reform. But we got a lot of grief about that from the press and from some elements of the right in our own party. You're being too soft on these guys. And as it turned out, we weren't. And for 15 years, people forget this. Today we're in a new Cold War with Russia. I mean, don't make no doubt about it, ladies and gentlemen. We are back in a Cold War. Russia's buzzing our planes and our aircraft, and it's not good. But for 15 years, after the implosion of the Soviet Union and the collapse of communism, we had really good relations between Russia and the United States and between Russia and NATO countries. That's all gone now. And it's regrettable, but it's the way it is. And so we need to do what we did when Ronald Reagan came in, Reagan and Bush came in 81. We need to be strong in defense. You achieve peace through strength, which was our motto, if you remember, on the foreign policy side in all of Reagan's campaigns. You achieve peace if you're strong. You don't get peace if you're weak.
Okay. Talk a little bit, I guess the other huge foreign policy accomplishment for you and President Bush was organizing the coalition for the first Persian Gulf War. Talk a little bit about how that was done.
Well, Saddam invaded Kuwait, much to the surprise of practically everyone, including our Arab allies in the Middle East. When I was in Irkutsk, Siberia, negotiating arms control with the Soviet foreign minister, when Iraq began massing troops on the Kuwaiti border. And our intelligence reported that to us, and there I was with the Soviet foreign minister. Iraq was a client state of the Soviet Union. And so I said to him, Eduard, we're getting all these reports that Saddam is massing all these troops on the border of Kuwait. What's going on? He said, oh, you wouldn't be so foolish as to do that. That's not going to happen. He wouldn't be so foolish. I said, well, you might want to get the KGB to look at it because the CIA tells us it's going to happen, maybe. And so we broke for lunch. And he came back after lunch and he said, that can't happen. He just would never do that. That's foolish. He just isn't going to do it. I said, okay. And I flew off to an event in Mongolia that I had. I was the first Secretary of State to ever go to Mongolia, but here was this tiny little communist country sandwiched between Russia and China, the big communist giants, and they wanted to reform and embrace democracy and free markets. So we wanted to talk. So I flew off to Mongolia. By the time I landed in Ulaanbaatar, Iraq had invaded Kuwait, and I canceled my trip to Mongolia, got on the phone with President Bush, stayed on the phone most all night, decided that we would, on my way back, instead of coming straight back, I'd go back through Moscow and see if I couldn't get the foreign minister, Shevardnadze, to condemn this invasion together with the United States. It was hard to get him to do it, but he ended up doing it. So I flew back through Moscow, and we stood there, and jointly, the American Secretary of State and the Soviet Union's foreign minister condemned the action of a Soviet client state in invading Kuwait. And then the administration, Bush administration, myself, Dick Cheney, the Secretary of Defense, President Bush, of course, Colin Powell, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Brent Scowcroft, the National Security Advisor. We started having a lot of meetings to figure out what exactly we were going to do. President Bush made it clear to us at the very beginning that if it required it, we would use force to reverse that aggression. It was a very brutal occupation. The Iraqis were brutalizing the Kuwaiti people. And so we set about trying to pull together a coalition of other like-minded nations that would support us, because bear in mind now, in the Bush administration, in the Reagan administration, we always had a Democratic House. In the Bush administration, we had a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate. And if we were going to take the nation to war, we wanted to get Congress's approval, not because we thought we needed it, because we didn't think we did. We thought we had that power under the president's commander-in-chief powers, but because we wanted the American people to be behind the effort. And it wasn't easy to get it. We only got it 52 to 48 in the Senate. But one way we decided might work to move public opinion in the United States, and particularly opinion on the Hill, would be if we could get a lot of other countries to join with us in this effort. So we decided we would go through the United Nations and file a resolution authorizing the use of all necessary means to kick Iraq out of Kuwait. And we did so, and we were then in a position, we get all these countries to join with us. We were in a position to go to a senator on the Hill and say, Senator, you're not going to support the president in this effort, but the president of Ethiopia is going to support him. And it worked pretty well. And we got a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate to approve the action. And then the military part of it was quite simple. I tell people that what we did was a textbook example of the way to fight a war. You tell people what you're going to do. You go out and do it. You don't do any more than that. And then you bring the troops home. And when it's all over, you get other people to pay for it. And we did. It's the only war America's ever fought that we didn't have to pay for most of it. We paid $10 billion for that war. It cost about $75 or $80 billion. And we went on 10 cup missions all around the world. And we said, you know, you like the idea of our reversing this unprincipled aggression? Then pony up, chip in. We got everybody. We got Asian nations, we got European nations, and we got Arab nations to contribute troops, if you can believe this. We got Syria to contribute troops to a war against Iraq. That was something that's something that may not be done again for a long time either.
Okay. Well, you've mentioned both President Reagan and President Bush 41. Mm-hmm. Can you speak to their legacies?
Well, I think their legacies are going to be extraordinary, frankly. I've already spoken to President Bush's. I really honestly believe, and I think he will go down in history as the most successful one-term president we've ever had. President Reagan is already seen to be an extraordinarily successful and important two-term president. And so many things were done on both of their watches. I can't, we don't have time for me to tick off everything, but I think that's what their legacies will be. You know, I should say, for the benefit of your audience, I also worked for President Gerald Ford, and that's where I met Bob and Elizabeth Dole. I had been recruited by President Ford to be his delegate hunter in the Kansas City Convention against Ronald Reagan, the then governor of California. Little did I know that I'd be sitting at Reagan's right hand for 4 years as his chief of staff. But anyway, I went out there and we hustled the delegates, and we won that nomination right here in Kansas City by, I think, 100 delegate votes out of 3,500 votes that were on the floor of the convention. And it was the last seriously contested national convention of either major political party. And then after we got the nomination, President Ford asked me to chair his general election campaign against Jimmy Carter, which I did. And we came a lot closer than people think. We lost that election by only 10,000 votes out of 81 million votes that were cast. You turn 10,000 votes around in Iowa and Hawaii, and Ford would have been president, and Carter would never have been president. People don't realize that. But Ford ran a wonderful race, and Jerry Ford was absolutely the right person for America when he came into office. In the aftermath of Richard Nixon's resignation, we needed somebody who would restore America's pride and confidence in herself, and Jerry Ford was the man to do that. But I can't say enough good about any of the three of them. I want to tell you, here's somebody who, as I said, never expected to end up working for Ronald Reagan, having run 2 campaigns against him. But what a joy it was to work for the Gipper. The Gipper believed in loyalty up, but he believed in loyalty down. And if you worked for him, he was always there for you. No doubt about it. I used to get attacked from time to time by some elements on the far side of our party. Some of you here know what I'm talking about. But the Gipper wouldn't stand for it. He just went, and he'd get a letter from somebody. One particular guy from my hometown, Houston, wrote him and said, your agenda is being undermined by your chief of staff. And Reagan sat down and wrote a long handwritten letter. Yes, I won't mention his name. Yes, so-and-so. I know our agenda is being undermined, but it isn't being undermined. It's being enacted by or helped by us. But see, that's the kind of loyalty he evidenced. And history is already remembering him well.
Mm-hmm. Very definitely. Mm-hmm. Very definitely. You've referenced Senator Dole, and I know you worked with him at several junctures during your career and his career. Talk a little bit about what you believe his legacy is.
Well, I think Bob's going to be seen to be a consummate leader. That's what we call him, leader, and a consummate legislator. He really knew how to get things done. He was committed to bipartisanship, just like George Bush was, just like, by the way, Ronald Reagan was. Everybody thought Ronald Reagan was hardline, ideologue. If he told me once, he told me 80 times, Jim, I'd rather get 80% of what I want than go over the cliff with my flag flying. And that was Reagan, and Bush was the same way, and Dole was the same way. And that's why we were able to get, those are signal accomplishments, to deal with Social Security, reform the tax code for the first time in 100 years and do it in a revenue neutral way. We couldn't have done that without Bob Dole as majority leader or as chairman of the Finance Committee. I think he will. And then, of course, you remember both he and George Bush were both chairman of the Republican National Committee. So they helped their party, and they both contributed tremendously to their country as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I don't know whether you know this or not, and maybe your audience would be interested in knowing that I recruited Elizabeth for the first Reagan White House, first term, and recommended her to President Reagan. and he made her assistant to the president for public liaison. She worked right there in the White House with us. I don't know whether you were in the White House that early. You probably came.
I was there starting in '82.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, again, one of the issues that I had to face in deciding what to ask you today was your career is so long and it's so immense. So, we've focused on the Reagan presidency, the Bush presidency, but we haven't talked about everything. Is there something else in particular that you've done in any of your roles in public service that we haven't talked about that you'd like to
Well,
mention
no,
here?
but I mean, it's in my book. We did a lot at Treasury. You know, we did something called the Plaza Accord, where we got all the major currency countries of the world together to adjust currencies, which were badly out of whack. Something had never been done. We had to do it on a Sunday night so the markets wouldn't be spooked, and that worked pretty well. The Tax Reform Act was accomplished at Treasury. I can't think of anything. I ended up, believe it or not, for somebody who was advised to stay out of politics, I ended up, in effect, chairing 5 presidential campaigns for 3 different Republican presidents. Now, if you'd asked me in 1970 or 73 or 4 even, if there was any chance I'd do that, I'd say, you're crazy. Hell no, there's no chance. But that's something that I think is fairly unique. Politics, you know, is the way you earn the right to practice public policy, the way you earn the right to become a policymaker. And so when people demean politics, I take it a little bit, I take it as an insult. It's our system. It can be ugly. It hadn't been very pretty recently, but it's better than anything else. Winston Churchill said, you know, democracy is messy, but it's better than any other system. And it's true.
Okay. I have a couple or 3 more questions, and then we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. So if you have a question, we need you to write it down on the note cards that we passed out and start to pass those over to the side, and someone is going to come and pick those up. Is that correct? Okay, very good. So if we can get that process started. Secretary Baker, we've talked a little, you and I have talked a little bit about this today, but share your thoughts on the midterm elections yesterday and what they mean for the country.
Well, we didn't see a blue wave, I don't think, but we lost the House, and we lost it fairly meaningfully. I think we came out a lot better in the Senate races than most people expected us to. There's still 2 of them, as I understand it, that haven't been decided, in addition to the one in Mississippi, which I think will definitely go Republican. So we have a chance of ending up with 54 Senate seats, up from 51. Nobody, I don't think, anticipated that would happen. To do that, we've got to win Florida and Arizona. And I don't know where, I haven't looked at anything for the last 2 hours, so I don't know where we are on that. We'll probably have a recount in Florida. Now, if you want to know about Florida recounts, ask me a question. I can tell you everything in the world about Florida recount. I went down there for George W., of course, in the Bush-Gore deal, and for 37 days we didn't know whether we were going to win or not. A lot of lawsuits. We'd win one, we'd lose one. We'd win one, we'd lose one. We never really knew. But I'll tell you a funny anecdote about that. When I was Secretary of the Treasury, the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee was a Democrat from Florida named Lawton Childs. And Lawton and I became friends. And Lawton liked to hunt turkeys, and I liked to hunt turkeys. So I would invite him to Texas to hunt turkeys, and I'd call them from him, and he'd blow them away. And then he'd call them for me, and I'd shoot them. And so I got to know him pretty well, and I knew, and he then left the Budget Committee chairmanship, went back to Florida and became governor of Florida. And he appointed practically all the judges on the Florida Supreme Court. And I knew these people to be really way over to the left. And I knew when I went down to Tallahassee after Governor Bush called me and said, would you go down and represent me in the Florida recount, I knew we didn't have a chance if we couldn't get in federal court. And so we set about trying to get into federal court, and ultimately we were successful in doing that. I do make the point to people, though, who say, oh, you were contesting an election. I make the point we were preserving an election. We never were behind in the count. Even the media went down in the aftermath of that exercise with hanging chads and stuff. They did their own counts, and they concluded that Bush had won under all the counts. So a lot of political stuff there.
Right, right. Talk a little bit about the Baker Public Policy Institute, which is located on the Rice campus.
My grandfather was the first chairman of the board of Rice University. Rice University is a very fine academic institution in Houston, Texas. It was established with a bequest from a man named William Marsh Rice, who was a businessman in Houston. He moved to New York in the later years of his life, accumulated more wealth. My grandfather was his lawyer, and he wrote the will that left all this money to the establishment of Rice University. Then Mr. Rice was murdered in his apartment in New York, and in those days there were no planes or anything, so my grandfather got a telegram saying Mr. Rice died last night under suspicious circumstances or something like that. My grandfather wired back, don't do anything with the body, I'm on the way up there. Well, on the way up there in those days was 2 days or a day and a half by train. And my grandfather went up there and figured out that this unscrupulous New York lawyer had gotten a hold of Mr. Rice, written a different will, leaving everything, if you can believe this, to the lawyer and his colleagues. And he had cooperated with Mr. Rice's butler to chloroform the old man. And you can read this in the Northeastern Reporter. It's called Patrick versus New York, or Patrick versus State. Anyway, he concluded that had happened, and the unscrupulous lawyer, whose name was Albert Patrick, was indicted and sent to the New York State Prison for a while, and grandfather saved the bequest for the university. And so I'm close to Rice University. When I came out of government in '93, they came to me, some of the people from Rice, the president and the chairman of the board, said, we'd like to establish a policy institute here in your name if you'd okay that. And I said, well, that's okay with me, provided two things. Number one, that you don't grant degrees, because I don't want it to get crossways with the regular faculty of the university. And number two, that I don't have to raise the money for it. Well, guess what happened? They didn't grant degrees, but guess who raised the money for it?
What sorts
Well,
of...
I got to go back 1 minute, though. I told you
bet.
that Mr. Patrick conspired with Mr. Rice's butler to murder him. So there's a murder mystery where the butler did it.
Well, we've really worked hard here, and you got a chance to meet one of our students and may get a chance to see a couple more, but to build a student culture here, it appears yesterday that the turnout was greatly increased, and we're hoping that young people are part of that, because we expected that to be the case. But what would you say to young people here about the importance of getting involved in public service?
Well, I think it's important to get involved in politics, because that's how you get involved in public service. politics, as I just said earlier, is the key to public service. And you know, Bob's a good example of this. Bob was involved really in electoral politics all his life, from the very beginning almost. George Bush had a little bit different career and approach. George Bush did something else first before he got into politics. You can take either path, but I think we live in the finest country in the world. We have the greatest opportunities of any people in the world. You travel this world as Secretary of State, you learn how many people appreciate the United States. They appreciate our involvement. They know when we're involved in internationally, we're a force for good. We're not out there looking to get into somebody else's sandbox or take somebody else's territory. And somebody put it very aptly one time, I think, when they said, you know, we fought all these wars. Last century, we fought 2 hot ones and a cold one. And all we've ever asked for is enough ground to bury our dead. And that's very noble. And this experiment, this democratic experiment here in the United States has been a resounding success. Yes, it's messy. Yeah, we have periods of ugliness and controversy and tension like we're going through today. But everybody, I think, has an obligation to put something back in to the system that's been so good to us. And the way you do that is to get involved in politics. If you're successful in politics, then you can be successful in public service.
Okay, we have a number of questions, and I hope I'm getting a few more because the first 3 are all about the same subject. And so if I don't read your exact question, it's because I got 3 that are almost identical. But what advice would you give to the President and Secretary of State Pompeo to restore America's standing in the world?
Well, I think the important thing is that we ought to speak with one voice. We ought to have a consistent message. We ought to absolutely remain involved. We ought to recognize the importance of our alliances. The alliances that we have out there with other countries help the United States leverage our position in the world. They're extremely important to us. That's not to say that we should not insist that we be treated fairly. We should. We should. And for years, quite frankly, we've been taken advantage of in areas of trade, particularly by China. China is the emerging global superpower. She's already an economic superpower. I'm one who fought like hell as Secretary of State and to see China admitted to the World Trade Organization. It was before that time, but that was our message back in those days. China ought to be a member of the WTO. And she is now, but she hasn't lived up to her obligation. You can't do business. A U.S. company can't do business in China today without forking over all of its technology to China. That's not right. And sooner or later, push is going to come to shove. But I guess the advice I would say is stay involved. It's really important. Fill your positions, appoint people, because you can't do it all by yourself. The president can't do it all by himself. He's at the top of the pyramid, and you know how big the pyramid is. It's huge. And there's a lot of talent there that can help you perform the chief executive responsibilities. But first and foremost, speak consistently. Don't go from one position to another. Make sure that you articulate the positions in ways that both your allies and your adversaries can understand. Make sure that you are respected by your allies and feared by your adversaries.
Okay, our next question is one that I think it's a very good and very important question. I'm going to shorten it a little bit, but do you think we'll ever return to the politics of civility as it was when Dole and Kassebaum were serving in the Senate? Are there enough centrists in the two-party to get us back towards a more moderate government?
Well, that is a really good question, and in order to answer that question, I think I need to tell you what I believe has happened. I believe what has happened is that we are a nation today essentially evenly divided between red states and blue states. We are a nation in which divisiveness sells, and comity, that's C-O-M-I-T-Y, not C-O-M-E-D-Y. Divisiveness sells, but comity doesn't. We're a nation in which our press are no longer objective reporters of the facts. They are players. If you listen to Fox News, you'd think you were listening to the House organ of the Republican Party. If you listen to MSNBC or CNN, you'd know you were listening to the House organ of the Democratic Party. That's not good for our democracy. Our press should not be players. They ought to be objective reporters of the facts, which is what they were back in the days when I was there with Bob Dole and George Bush and Ronald Reagan and Nancy Kassebaum. And we need to get back to that. The last thing I would say is that we have an internet today, and anybody can throw anything they want up there and see what sticks. And people do it all the time, and then along comes a mainstream media outlet, and they'll pick up on it and push it. So these are all very destructive of getting back to the kind of thing you're talking about. I've always believed, I know Bob Dole believed, that you win general elections from the middle. You don't win them from the fringes. You win primaries from the fringes. And then once you win an election, you have to govern from the middle. And you're particularly going to have to do that now with a split Congress, a House controlled by Democrats and a Senate controlled by Republicans. So you got to learn what bipartisanship is. Learn how it can be effective. Learn how compromise is not a dirty word. No, you're not going to get 100% of what you want. But in our democracy, no one side gets to set all the rules or make all the decisions. And so it's important to get back to bipartisanship. How we do it? I thought that once we got to a point where one party controlled all the levers of power, we could get there. That hadn't worked. Under 43, we controlled, the Republicans controlled all three for a little while. Under Obama, the Democrats controlled all three for a little while. So it's these other factors, I think, to get it. Redistricting is very difficult. There's some things some states are giving taking it out of the hands of politicians and giving it to independent commissions. That's not a bad idea in my view, because in a state dominated by Democrats, you get more and more safe, left-leaning, safe districts on the left, and in Republican state, you get more and more on the right. And that serves to eliminate the responsible center from our politics. And I think that people like George Bush, Ronald Reagan, Gerald Ford, Bob Dole, myself, people like that, we're moderates. We're centrists. The center is disappearing from our politics, and that is not a good thing.
Okay. Here's a detailed question. During the Gulf War, you presented a resolution to the United Nations Security Council to get the Iraqi forces out of Kuwait. What was the greatest challenge you faced in order to make that resolution get through the Security Council?
The greatest challenge I faced was convincing the Chinese and the Russians, the Soviet Union, not to veto it. And we finally, I told you about flying back from Mongolia after Saddam had invaded and meeting with Shevardnadze in an airport lobby in Moscow and condemning the invasion. And ultimately, we were able to move that toward getting the Soviet Union to join us in supporting a resolution of the UN Security Council. Hadn't been done before, and not going to be done anytime soon, to use force against a UN member state. And we did. And the Soviets stood with us on that. China was a particularly difficult problem at that time because we were in office in the immediate aftermath of Tiananmen Square. And President Bush had to come up with a response to Tiananmen. People in the United States were outraged. Thousands of people were killed by the Chinese government for peaceful protests. And so we censured China. We sanctioned China. And China was pissed off about that. And so I had to get them. They weren't going to vote for our resolution, but I had to get them to at least abstain, and I finally did. And those were the two most difficult things. We had the rest of pretty much the rest of the Security Council, except Cuba. I even sat down with the foreign minister of Cuba in those days. We wouldn't talk to a Cuban. You don't do that. You catch something. So we didn't. But they told me you can't sit down with a Cuban. I said, I'm going to go sit down with the Cubans. And I did, and he stiffed me, and I said, that's fine. But they were on the Security Council. Yeah, in the Security Council, you have 5 permanent members that can veto. And then you got to get, if you don't get a veto, you got to get 9 affirmative votes. There are 15 countries on the Security Council. So I had Cuba to deal with. Then I had Yemen to deal with. Yemen. So I said, well, I'm going to Sana'a, and I'm going to meet with the president of Yemen. And boy, you talk about a backward country. That is a really backward country. And during the noon hour from 12 to 2, they chew this stuff called khat, K-A-T, and it's a narcotic. So from 12 to 2, they're about like this. And so I went to Sana'a, and I met with Shalala, the president, and he greeted me effusively. He took me into his private dining room. He gave me a wonderful Yemeni meal of boiled lamb and everything. Gave me the eyeballs, that's special. And I thought, man, I'm really making progress with this guy. This is great. And then he said, well, now it's time to meet the press. I said, yes, sir, it is. And I went out and I said, we had a wonderful meeting. I've had a wonderful discussion here with President Shalala and so forth and so on. And then it was his turn. And he got up there in front of the Yemeni media and just trashed me up one side and down the other and trashed the United States. And then when we got into the Security Council, we knew we had the votes because I wasn't going to bring it to a vote unless we knew we actually had the votes. And we waited until the United States was in the chair. And so we brought it to a vote. The Soviets supported it. The Chinese abstained. Cuba voted against. And then it was Yemen's turn. And the Yemeni ambassador to the United Nations got up in the balcony, and he gave this impassioned speech. We've got to give peace a chance. We can't do this. And a lot of the audience in the Security Council just applauded like it. And I turned to the guy and I said, that's the most expensive applause you will ever get. And we quickly canceled $300 million in aid for Yemen. But we got a vote of 12 to 2, 1 abstention, and that's how we got it.
Okay, very good. Last question that we have time for today. Having occupied the positions of Secretary of State, Secretary of the Treasury, and White House Chief of Staff, what practical advice would you offer to current and future individuals who occupy those positions? That's a tough one.
Well, just first of all, know what the position requires, what it demands of you. Be true to yourself, but be true to your administration's position. Don't do anything that you wouldn't that you wouldn't do otherwise just because you occupy those jobs. They're totally different jobs. The chief of staff's job is a political job. It's the worst job in government, by the way, because your job is to catch all the javelins that are intended for the old man. And when they can't get to him, they're going to get to you. And one of the things I'm most proud of, Bill, is that when I left Washington in 1993, Doonesbury did a cartoon. It said, here's a guy who has served 3 presidents in the following positions, and he named them, and run 5 presidential campaigns, and he named them, and is leaving Washington without having been indicted. And that's the advice I'd give them. Do things that won't get you indicted.
Well, Mr. Baker, it's been delightful to have you here. I'm going to ask you to stand up because I need to present the 2018 Dole Leadership Prize to you. There you go, sir.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. You're going to send that to us, right?
We will.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you all for coming out. We really appreciate
How
it.
you, General? Glad to see you. Glad to see you.
Thanks for coming.
Congratulations
Appreciate
for
it.
your reelection.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay, yeah.